Yo, welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. Today we're going over Jayden, who was just released this week in War of the Visions. Very excited, been looking forward to him, particularly since Elena's announcement and release, just because I know the two of them together are really going to change the game going forward. So without further ado, let's get into things. Going over what I'm going to cover today, go over a overall character review to start, report card and stat analysis next, general thoughts to kind of sum up what I think about him and the themes you're going to see in the presentation, the class and job overview, and during that time I'm going to go over his crazy AP utilization, which not everyone has really talked about yet. And the second thing is potential crazy height analysis in terms of what he's capable of for range. I'm also going to go over some of his vision card and the synergies of the others, some esper optimizations, some weapon optimizations related to the KSAR gun and which one's best and applicable where. And then finally, I do have a live video of him and some results of him in the Guild Wars, at least as it pertains to versus Mono Dark. And then when we fought Visipor, the #1 ranked global guild earlier this week. Without further ado, though, continuing on, the character overview is a brand new light element. His jobs, King of Stags, Black Mage, and Red Mage. The Black Mage and Red Mage are really there to round out his stats, although the Red Mage does have some actual genuinely good use. The weapon, he equips a gun with a hat cloth and accessory as the others, with a move of 3 and a jump of 1, 10% weakness to dark, and then for resistances, he does have some good resistances overall. This missile resist of 20 is actually 30 because of his Trust Mastery. He does also have a essentially 0% to slash, which is a good enough starting point. 10% to magic, also really important considering how the game has shifted. And then the weakness to pierce and strike, although negative 5%, that strike resistance is very quickly eradicated once you also put him with the Elena vision card, so keep that in mind. From a status ailment perspective, not great. Poison and Toad, which are more niche and don't really influence the battle as much, and 10% is slow, so he needs some work there, but like this is good enough. The rest of his kit is really good, and we'll get into why. So the report card, this was actually really interesting putting together because the report card does not tell the story of the character, and that's something I'm learning more and more every day. So when I look at someone's HP, and this is essentially what the chart is in front of you, just don't even ignore it, look at me for now. We want to look at someone's effective HP, not their actual HP. What I mean by that is regular health points don't tell you a whole lot because you need to take into account the defense, the spirit, and the resistances, things of that nature. So, hypothetically, if someone had 5,000 HP and they were 100% resistant to slash damage, well, you could do slash damage all day to them, and their health pool is really infinite when you adjust it for the slash resistance. So that's kind of what this calculation does. My weighted HP column that I have over here basically weights slash damage a third, magic damage a third, and then averages the other three together. So in terms of his overall HP, I'm actually giving him a D on all physical, on all types, because what you're looking at here in the broad list, he's with like a lot of non-EX units. He is technically closer toward the bottom. He is relatively low health pool overall. There's things that are going to help him still survive the battle long enough, particularly so because he's a ranged missile unit. But that being said, HP is not good considering the other DPS above him for comparison. Also has no defense or spirit to start with either, which is kind of a hard hole to dig yourself out of. In terms of the primary stat, we're talking about the magic stat overall. He starts off at 541, and again, the support skills I have here are kind of like your average support skills you might see. Elena technically could have magic level 1 instead of Dark Spirit's Blessing, which does put her in the like 670 range rather than the 570 range. So so overall, for comparison though, Jaden is on the average side. I'm giving him a B here, but technically he does have some upside because he has a buff that buffs his magic by 60%, which basically puts him like near Black Rosalina for essentially starting magic. So it's really good. B is kind of an understatement, particularly because his damage is sneaky and that he's a missile unit, but it scales off his magic stat. We're going to get into why that. I'll do it right now. So technically, when you attack with magic rather than attack, it scales off the enemy's spirit rather than their defense. What that means is someone could have like 50% missile resistance, but if they have 40 defense, well, the defense doesn't really matter because Jaden doesn't attack that stat. When he attacks, because it's magic, you look at their spirit instead. So really hard to gear for spirit in this game in like a really material amount. You really need to have a ton of innate spirit to really get up to some higher values, which you really only see in a couple of the tanks. For his agility, I'm giving him a C+. It could be better. It's not the worst. He's strictly average, like 62 agility. He does technically have an extra 10% from his passive, which bumps him up a little bit, but still starting point's not that great. I'm giving him a C+. For accuracy, I'm also giving him a C+, because he is strictly average accuracy. And these percentages, again, those of you that are kind of new to the channel, essentially accuracy is your hit rate minus an enemy's evasion rate, and that gives you their true hit rate. So I have a whole video going over this, but for the purposes of right now, all you need to know is where he stands in the state of the game. He's strictly average. I do give him a C plus because he does have a guaranteed hit. It's just a weaker hit, and it doesn't have the same range as some of the other abilities. So although it's nice that he can hit people, you really want him spamming his more powerful abilities. For an evasion, he's a D. He's not going to evade anything, even with the luck up from the Elena card. He is below average for evasion, and in this game, even being slightly above average is not even good enough. You need to be top of the game good for evasion to really maximize what that has to offer. For movement, strictly a C as well, move of 3, jump of 1. And so if you're looking at this right now, and you're looking at these stats, and you're like, how the hell is this person a good character? His stats are terrible. Go through this. Number 1, it's the strength of the light cast. Number 2, it's the strength of the vision cards. But number 3, his kit is also really unique, and we're going to get into some more why. So his passives, I give him a B because he does have some variety and how you can build him. His counter abilities, I'm giving him an A because he has reflex, as we'll see soon, or magic reflex specifically. Overall kit, I'm giving him an A. It's pretty amazing for a kit overall, and his final grade is an A, and we're going to get into it, and we're going to see why. So my general thoughts, he's an incredible long-range unit, probably one of the longest range units in the game, or at least tied for it. Extremely unique damage type. So as I was mentioning earlier, he does missile type damage primarily, but it scales off his magic stat. So you're defending against it with missile resistance and spirit. So that's kind of hard to gear against reliably, considering that you can't gear for everything. You got to pick one thing or the other. So although his magic stat isn't the highest in the game, it does get pretty high, and his attack style is pretty unique, so it ends up doing more damage. He has some great AI options for buffing and attacking as well. He's got a self buff and a teammate buff, so that's really important when you're talking about agility tuning and how you make movement start at the start of a battle. Really great that he has that. To me, he will smoke any enemy non-Jayden missile team. Maybe a little bit harder when you're talking about Cloud and Fred versus him 2v1. Even then, though, it's still you can win that matchup pretty decently because he does have 30% missile resistance. He has a buff that will add 25 more. He also has up to 45% missile resistance penetration. And what penetration just quickly means in this game, whatever someone's stat is, you ignore a percentage of it. So if someone had 100% missile resistance, and you had 45% penetration, you ignore 45% of it. So it's as if they had 65% rather than 100%, which is pretty big. So you can get that, though. It's not innate. 30% with a self buff, and then 15% given from the diamond coat, which is the raid item this week. So it's not reliable 45%, but it's there when you're talking about missile matchups. He does have an amazing synergy with Lightcast, which I talked about. Average stats, but great kit, and his stats do get more significantly better with the vision cards, and he is, to me, a meta-defining unit. He is very unique and elevates that cast and does enough to kind of mitigate the dark cast that you're going to see a meta shift overall. Getting into the class of job overview, which is really the bread and butter of what makes him awesome. Passive abilities, Farsight is incredible. Really map specific though, depending on if you need that extra range of 2 or not. Magic level up is another great one, 30% magic. I'm a big fan too of Ruler's Refinement. That to me is like always equipped. I can't imagine a situation where you may not have this equipped. The increase of agility of 12%, I misspoke earlier, it's 12, not 10. And then the spirit penetration, same idea. You could have a really strong magic tank like Rain or Charlotte, and you're going to ignore 40% of their spirit. So for his damage output, that is very significant. AP level up is really niche, and then magic resistance is good, but again, a little more situational, really if you're trying to hard counter someone like Black Rose Elena, which he does, so that's an important piece to consider, but probably not all the time. For his counter abilities, Magic Reflex here at the bottom is by far the best one. I wouldn't equip anything else. The other two are pretty average. They are what they are, and we'll leave it at that. Main job, though, King of the Stags. This is where things get really, really interesting. So, Unerring Shot is that guaranteed hit. It's 121% modifier, relatively cheap. Sniper Stance is a great ability where it increases that missile resistance of 25% for 4 turns rather than an average 3, so that's noteworthy. It increases his range by 1 for that same duration of 4 turns. So technically someone like using aimed fire, that's a 3-turn buff versus his 4-turn buff. So he's going to kind of like edge out in that matchup most of the time. Magic Blast is a really great ability, a little more situational just because it does reach so far. And we're going to get into exactly how far, but it does have an attack break of 38%, so that's a nice addition to the range in the AoE. March of the Stag is great, increase the agility of 20% for allies, and a 60% magic buff for himself, which is very, very, very potent. Drill Shot, another really potent DPS increase for him, where it increases that missile resistance of penetration of 30 for himself. It also a decent modifier at 200%. And then Golden Magic Shot, another 200% modifier ability, relatively the same amount of AP. It's just something a little bit different where it decreases the charge time of an enemy. So pretty good. I don't know if it's the best ability, but it's a nice thing to have in his kit overall. But there's an asterisk, a big asterisk on this whole slide. AP consumption is something very unique to him that I don't think you're going to see in many other characters, at least to this degree. So we're skipping ahead here to his mastery ability. One of them is decrease AP consumption by 20% for self. Keep that in mind. What we're going to talk about before that, the diamond coat here increases acquired AP by 30%, which means anytime he uses a TP ability, like one of the buffs, or a regular attack, he'll get 30% more AP. His vision card also gives 30% acquired AP. What that means is, these are his two self buffs. These are their TP stats. Now, normally, whenever you use a TP ability, you get half of that back as AP. So this is normally what you would regenerate. Well, if you have his vision card equipped, you really get these as AP instead. And if you have both, they stack, his vision card and the coat, you technically get 60% acquired AP because it's two different sources of AP. I've actually already tested it. I already have the +5 diamond coat, and I actually checked it out. So, if you're using March of the Stag, normally you would get 18 AP from it. Well, Jaden, with these, vision card and the coat, will get 28. So his starting AP on like a build, level 120 with all the bells and whistles, starts at 41 AP. Use March of the Stag once, and you're going to start this battle at 59 AP for turn 2. Where this gets really, really crazy, we're going to circle back now, decrease AP consumption by 20%, which means all of these abilities, the cost is actually 20% less. So not only does he start the battle with a ton of AP, but he's also going to be able to use more abilities in a short span of time compared to who's probably opposite him. So this is a really important DPS buff for him, where he can usually get up more abilities than your average character can in the same period of time. The other thing, he's got crazy height and range, which we talked about. So Magiblast and Golden Magishot both have height of 4, meaning you can shoot 4 levels above him. I think comparably, Barrage is something similar, where it's a height of 4 with a kind of a similar range. The big difference is the AP, as we're talking about. Barrage is in the 40s for an AP cost, and these you're talking mid to low 20s. So he can definitely get a lot more flexibility from the range and height of this overall. So a range of 8, what that normally looks like is 8 squares away. I'm sure you can kind of visualize what that looks like, but I don't know if you can visualize what range of 8 and height of 4 looks like. This is from the Nightmare stage this week for the vision card that came out, the new ice one. So Jaden's way up here on the hill, and he can easily one-shot people 8 squares away, 4 levels down. That's a crazy amount of range. You're probably not going to get that upside in Guild Wars. Those maps don't have the same amount of height or range per se, but it's noteworthy. So finally, the sub job. We're going to get into this. This is not a bad sub job. It's not my favorite, but it's good. Dual Magic Shot is good for chaining, where it's a double hit. And then Paralyzing Shot is a good ability because he does have 97 Faith. Because he does scale off his magic stat, you are going to want to max that Faith stat. So there is a pretty decent shot that you could paralyze some people here, which isn't a really well-defended status effect. So there is some value there, particularly because it is so cheap at 17 AP. Black Mage, you're almost never going to use this. I mean it. This is here to increase his base stats. That's about it. The Red Mage, though, you probably will get some utilization out of, and I use it frequently. Jamming Thrust, I'm a big fan of, just because it does have similar range. The cancellation of ability activations is great when you're talking about someone like Black Rose Elena and jamming some of those cast times. And technically, he's actually not a bad healer either. He will Cura on occasion. He does have a similar AI to Black Rose Elena, where if someone's in range, he will use that instead. But if you're starting off a battle, like a second attack in Guild War, and you have someone who is low health, he will use Cura on them. And his magic stat, it's not the best, but you'll get some decent chunk of health back. So keep that in mind when you're doing some AI tuning. His Limit Break, TMR, and Mastery. This Limit Break, a little more situational than most Limit Breaks. I do think it's a decent ability, considering it's a triple hit for 43 AP. But the Break Magic Barrier for target is a little unique in that not everyone has a magic barrier, so you probably want to turn this on or off more than your average Limit Break. I actually have it off currently, but it's a good ability. It's nice that he has it in his kit. The TMR is a really interesting TMR, one of my also favorites because it does something unique to some of the other abilities where it's got great stats, number one, right off the bat for an accessory. Spirit, accuracy, crit rate, all things he wants and needs. But the second thing is the TMR skill. It's a shield, but it's not a specifically a physical shield or a magical shield. It's like an HP. It's all attack types, and it instead of lasting for 3 hits or 3 turns like your average shield does, it reduces a very specific amount of damage. And the best way I can, in addition to increasing missile attack, so it's a nice offensive buff too. But if you're thinking about missile users, like think of the quad shot ability, which is a 4-hit shot. Well, if you use something like Saintly Wall, which gives you a shield for 3 hits, quad shot will break all of those shields, even though it's not really a high damage ability. Well, if you use quad shot and he uses this one instead, quad shot's not going to break this shield unless it does more than 2,500 damage. So it's really nice in that chaining doesn't break these shields unnecessarily, whereas it's more damage oriented, which is a little more reliable in the broad scheme of things. And the master ability, we kind of went over the abilities here. So his vision card, I love the vision card. It's if you're going to use Jayden, you have to use the vision card. I really mean it. So HP, magic, he's got a ton of dexterity on the base stat here. Increases light attack of 15, increases HP 10%, which he needs because it's low HP. And then there's the acquired AP that we were talking about earlier. For party effects, it's an AoE resistance of 20, which is really awesome. Again, when you're talking about like battles against other missile units where they have barrage, this is going to help. Talking about Black Rose Elena, she does a majority AoE. This is going to help. The missile attack really only benefits him, but that's okay. And the increase of dexterity of 35% also is a massive, massive DPS boost because it does 2 things. Number 1, it increases your accuracy, so if you're hitting more often, that's a DPS boost. Number 2, it increases your crit rate, so if you're getting critical hits more often, that's a DPS boost. So the increase of dexterity 35% in addition to is already high dexterity, and the dexterity in this card is really, really amazing when you consider it with the card here on the left, the Elena card, where she gives a buff of luck 35%, which also increases his accuracy. So he's getting 2 buffs to accuracy by using both cards. And then number 2, this one is crit damage up. So since you're going to be critting a lot, you're going to do more damage when you crit because of this card as well. So this also gives him 20% strike resistance. So as we were talking about earlier, that 5% innate weakness isn't so bad because this card really quickly eliminates that. The Bahamut card, also really great. It's got unit resistance, which is good for like sharpshoot when you're talking about missile duels. It's also got the increase of agility, which makes him faster, which he needs. And then it also has the 50% buff to magic, which is supremely powerful, considering he's already got a pretty great magic stat for what he does already. And then the Carbuncle card is surprisingly a good one too, particularly when you're talking about missile duels, where it gives the 2 primary really good abilities on this are missile resistance to light units, and then spirit for light units. So when you're getting in some of those missile duels, this is a great card in that it will not only A, give your team missile resistance, but B, it will also give some spirit. So if there are some Jayden duels going on, and one team has this versus the other, the extra spirit might be the factor. Don't really know that yet for sure. The Esper synergies, 3 big ones really, and there's a bunch you could use, but it's really these big, these 3 overall. The first is Bahamut, the de facto best magic Esper, and again, the magic attack nodes here will not work on his missile type, but it will for jamming thrust. That being said, there are still magic increase nodes, there's still crit rate nodes, there's still human killer. It's got great agility, which he needs to help get him that extra turn or 2 in, and it does technically have strike resistance too, so if you're really worried about that strike resistance, this is another good Esper for him. Carbuncle, really underutilized, and for good reason. There's not many applicable situations, but Jayden certainly is one. So light attack up. He also has missile resistance on here, so as we're talking about those missile duels, Carbuncle will kind of give him that edge in the resistance. The magic attack nodes, again, really only good for the jamming thrust, but hypothetically, there are some crit evade nodes as well, and if you really are talking about like extinguishing the dark cast, there is dark resistance and dark killer on here too, so do with that what you will. This is a good Esper overall for him too. It's also a magic Esper, so it's literally perfect. Diabolos is another good one. You're not going to use some of the more normal nodes where you're going to be using more of the magic up number 1. You're probably going to two, use the crit rate ones to really ensure that you're getting those hits in. And then theoretically, the others, slash resistance and the magic attack for jamming thrust. It's not as great, but it's valuable because it does have some lower agility that you could, do some agility tuning with this Esper if you really needed to. So still a thumbs up. And then lastly, these two really great for class match. So when you're talking about limited cost for how much you can, equip on a character, definitely consider these two. They're kind of also like de facto magic Espers for really cheap. So consider them when you're putting them with Jaden. In terms of the weapon optimization, the Kesar gun, this gun cracks me up. This looks like something out of Star Trek. I've never seen Jayden in any of his artwork or cinematics or anything whip out this futuristic pistol. It's always like the Gatling gun and the rifle, so whatever. If you're talking about which gun, though, it really is only this one. The others really all scale off attack. This is one that actually scales off magic, so he really desperately kind of needs that for that offensive output. And you're talking about which build, it's one of the few weapons I actually am... This is kind of crazy. I'm actually going to build all three. All three are good. They really are. It's just completely situational. And it really does depend on whether you're going against Hyper Evade, whether you have the Elena card with you or not. If you're talking about the critical build, for instance, which gives you a critical rate up, well, we already talked about this. He's got a ton of dexterity, so his crit rate is already super high. If you're going against a team that, doesn't have very high luck overall, he's probably not going to need this extra crit rate because it's already so high, in which case the magic build is really the optimal one. But if you're going against like a fellow Jaden comp or a evasive mono dark comp, the crit rate might be the difference in terms of getting that extra damage. And on that same note, if you're going against mono dark, which is really evasive, you might want that aim build for the extra 13 accuracy because, as we mentioned, he's strictly average for accuracy. Now again, he does get those buffs from the card for his accuracy, but he's not going to reliably hit Venera with a lot of his abilities other than the guaranteed hits. So again, time and place for how you want to use that. Overall though, I don't think you can go wrong with really any of these. Magic and critical are really the two safe bets in general. And he's legit, so I'm not going to show you the video of me fighting VIP, and I have a lot of this blacked out just for the integrity of what they do, for kind of their secrets, if you will. It's not big secret. The guilds at the top 10 know about it, but I don't want to be blasting it on this channel. We did play them a couple days ago. They're the #1 ranked guild in global. We got the absolute shit kicked out of us. There's a reason why they're #1. They're very, very good and very, very smart, in addition to just having all the resources available at their disposal. But I did get 6 stars on them. It wasn't the prettiest in the world. Obviously, I got an Engelbert at half health remaining, and I didn't do 2 fresh opens. I chained 1 that was already open, but I did take out 3 people, obviously. And the second one was a fresh open, but it wasn't their typical meta comp, so it was kind of an off meta comp. Regardless, though, like, it worked. This comp worked, and this was in its very early stage. I did build Jaden. He's only level 115, so I'm still learning about him too, obviously, so not optimized by any means, but this was really refreshing to see that it's at least viable. And I think it's only going to get better going forward. And so now I'm actually going to show you a video against a test of like an evasive mono dark comp. This one, you can build them many different ways, and I'm going to talk about some caveats, but I'm really just going to talk through some of it in general. So mono dark is really great because they're extremely fast. You're going to see they're going to move first here. They're very accurate, very evasive for the same reasons that the light cast are now, because Maidens of the Dark gives you dexterity and luck, which are 2 immensely important stats. I like Jaden here. He's going to use March of the Stag on Engelbert, which is the agility boost, which Engelbert is slow as molasses. It definitely helps. Every little bit does help. As we start to converge in the middle, you'll probably notice that a lot of the dark setup here is more for mobility, more so than resistances, and that's obviously to get as close as possible because it's a long-range map. So I'll talk about that context in a second here, but Dwayne's going to move forward, and one of the things that I'm still kind of working out, Jaden's going to come in here. He's going to jamming thrust him for 11,000 damage. Now, there's a thing to be said here. Number one, Dwayne can easily be built for magic. I did a guild war the other day where this same ability only did 4,000 damage, and that's because the person stacked very heavily against magic and for spirit. That being said, 4,000 damage against someone who's like maxing Dwayne's magic resistance potential and missile resistance potential is still kind of reassuring. That's not an insignificant amount of damage. The one thing that makes me nervous, and I'm still working out though, to me this is like too close for Jaden. He is very much in striking distance of a lot of people here, and so I do have disabled that Magic Blast ability, which we were talking about, the large range. maybe counterintuitive, but one thing I noticed was he uses it kind of early because he can snipe so far, but he's not one-shotting anybody with it. And with someone like Black Rosalanda here, she'll usually just heal that damage right back up immediately. So although he is really, efficient with his AP, it's kind of a waste early on, so I have it disabled for now. But definitely some risks here because as you're going to see, Black Rosalanda is going to come in. He is in the AoE of the Darker that she's going to cast, but it hits him for crit, and it's 4,000 damage, so he's still alive. And again, that's not including if he had his shield activated. This is where all these things come into play, with like the AoE resist being really beneficial. But he's alive. He's in danger. I don't like that, but it's there. Elena's going to one-shot the Venera here, which is great. And then you're going to watch Enkel produce some more stuff. But then you're going to watch another jamming thrust out of Jayden, and it just obliterates this Black Rosalanda. And again, these values are very high because this mono dark team is not equipped for like a ton of strong resistances, but still mono dark. It's still a pretty common setup. Overall the numbers are there, and you can see the movement is pretty decent overall. But that's in a nutshell. He's definitely someone to watch out for. And that's the Jayden review. Hopefully this was informative. I'm having a ton of fun building him out so far, and really trying to see where he can fit in with the cast, and subbing in Engelbert and Warrior of Light, and seeing which buff abilities and TMRs work really well. There's a bunch of different ways to potentially manipulate him, and this map is a prime playground to kind of stress test that. So for those of you that have pulled for him, hopefully you're having fun. Hopefully this is something insightful, that you've learned a lot today, and be able to at least either enable your Jayden better, or B, know how to defend against him if you're seeing him on the opposite side. But I'm excited for how this is going to change the game, because I definitely think it's going to. That being said, thank you for watching. I'll talk to you all soon.